welcome to meeting number 29 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Indigenous and Northern Affairs. We recognize that we meet on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe peoples. Pursuant to the order of the House, the committee is commencing its study of Bill S2, an act to amend the Indian Act, new registration entitlements. Now, a budget for the study has been prepared and circulated. Is it the will of the committee that we adopt a budget of $89,350 for the study of this bill? Getting nodding heads, very good. Okay, so I'd like to welcome the witnesses on our first panel. And before I do that, just a reminder that, for the interpreters, leave your earpiece in your ear, but if you decide not to leave it in your ear, please place it away from your mic and make sure your mic is off so that the interpreters do not get any kind of feedback. And thank you very much to the interpreters for continuing to do great work. So our first panel we have as an individual, Sharon, how did we say the last name? McIver? McIver. Thank you very much, Sharon. And then we also have Dr. Pamela Palmater, Chair in Indigenous Governance, Toronto Metropolitan University by video conference. Good to see you again. Hi, Laurie. Good morning to you as well. Good to see you online as well. And we have the Quebec Native Women, Inc., Marjolaine Etienne, President. Welcome. So please, you'll each have 5 minutes for a presentation, and then there'll be a number of questions and comments throughout the first panel. So thank you very much. So please, let's begin. Sharon.
Okay, good morning. My name is Sharon McIver, and I'm in Laketma from South Central British Columbia. I was born, live, and work on the land that I belong to, as have my ancestors as far back as we know, my children and my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren. S3 is something that we've been working on for a long time. I'm just going to let you know who I am. I was born on my home territory, and when I was born, the legal definition of a person was in the Indian Act was anyone other than an Indian. So when I was born, I wasn't considered a person. I've been doing activism for a long time. I did my first activism in July of 1968. So next July, I have been doing this for 60 years. Probably some of you haven't been around for 60 years, but I've been doing the activism for 60 years. I'm the plaintiff in the McIver case. It was the first case that took Bill C-31 to court, and about 125,000 people benefited from that case. That's the ones that we can count. When I first applied for status for myself in August of 1985, and my son was 14 years old, and got through the system, and I was given status, my son was not. I had, by the time we got it through the internal system and I was ready to go to court, that was in July of 1989, and my son at that time had just turned 18. And it took from July of 1989 to January of 2006 to get into court, to actually get a court date set. And that was, the government of Canada prevented me from doing that for all sorts of reasons and stalling tactics. In January of 2006, we finally got a court date. And the court was in 2006. We got a decision in June 2007, went through the BC Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court of Canada, and the legislation finally got through. The legislation on the McIver Amendment finally got through in 2011. And my son was able, because of the process, my son finally got his status in 2015. And we started when he was 14, and it took 30 years for him to actually get his status. And so all I'm saying is that I've been to every amendment to the Indian Act after 1985. I've done this. And so I'm not telling you about the legislation, I'm just telling you about the process. And what about this bill, it's really important because we have the extermination. This legislation, if you don't change the legislation, it will exterminate all of us that are entitled to status. And I guess the other thing that I wanted to talk about was the first status member that was elected to Parliament was my good friend Len Marchand. In 1968, I was doing my activist work, and he was trying to get into Parliament, so maybe he could make a change. He was there in until 1979, and we would meet on a regular basis. I was the same as his sister. His sister was being discriminated the same, and he was not able to make any difference. He was also the first status Indian that was on the executive and that. So I'm just saying is that our process is that we've got people in Parliament now, Indigenous people in Parliament, and Len couldn't even get it talked about. Now we're getting it talked about, but we also have Indigenous people that are not thinking that we should make these changes. And for those of us who have been fighting for so long, we're quite disappointed in that. And I guess the last thing I'm going to say, or the second last thing I'm going to say, is I want to say that there were several things that went on legislatively over the years that prevented us from bringing this. When they introduced the human rights legislation, Section 67 wouldn't allow us as Indians to use it to challenge the discrimination that we had been suffering over the years. And in 1920, Duncan Campbell Scott, the Deputy Superintendent of Indian Affairs, said, "I want to get rid of the Indian problem. Our object is to continue until there is not a single Indian in Canada that has not been absorbed into the body politic. And there is no Indian question." And we're still there today. And I'm just saying, are we going to just get Duncan Campbell Scott's goal achieved, or are we going to act now and put an end to all of this? For us, it's either existence or extinction.
Well, thank you, Sharon, and there'll be plenty of time for you to make more comments during the question and answer period.
What's that?
Thank you very much, Sharon, and there'll be plenty of time for you to say some more things during the question and answer period, but we're just going to go to the next speaker because we're just a little over time. So thank you. Thank you, Sharon, very much. Thank you.
Many times.
Thank you. Next, we're going to go to Pamela, who is online for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you so much. Kwe, hello, bonjour. Ninda Louise Pam Palmater. I'm from the Eel River Bar First Nation, which is part of the larger Mi'kmaq Nation, and I have been working on this issue for 40 years. Thank you for inviting me to appear. By way of background, I've been a lawyer in good standing for 26 years.
Point of order.
And
Point of order. Hold on a second, please. Go ahead, Laurie.
There's a lot of echo, and I wonder if that can be fixed. I don't know if she can hear her own echo.
I can hear a huge echo as well.
Okay, so online we're hearing echoes. The technician will take a look at that right now. Please just, we'll suspend for just a few seconds, please.
Okay. restart the clock? Do I just restart my 5 minutes?
Yeah, from the top, please, right from the beginning.
Okay, thank you so much. Oh, and I still hear a huge echo. I think it's from the room. What you're hearing is bouncing back to MP Idlu and I.
Okay, I'm turning my mic on, but I'm going to turn it off. So right now, start everyone. I'm looking. I do not see any red lights on.
Okay.
Now.
It's okay, I don't hear an echo right now. I'm just going to start my 5 minutes. Kwe Nindaluizi Pampalmater. I'm from the Sovereign Mi'kmaq Nation, and I'm a member of Eel River Bar First Nation. I've been working on this issue for 40 years, and by way of background, I've been a lawyer in good standing for 26 years, 10 of which I did at Justice Canada, advising then Indian Affairs. And I just want to say quickly, thank you to Sharon. She is the grandmother to thousands of us. And if she didn't put in 60 years of her advocacy, I wouldn't be able to be here talking to you about this issue. And I'm here because my grandbabies are currently excluded and they need to be a part of my First Nation. So I'm asking this committee to pass Bill S2 as exactly amended by Senate. No more amendments. The House should pass this legislation without further delay. The litigants in the Nicholas case deserve justice, as do the many children and grandchildren like mine of First Nations families who would be registered, but for the long-standing sex and race-based discrimination in Indian registration. Historic levels of consensus by First Nation women, First Nation advocacy organization, First Nation communities, as well as constitutional and human rights experts all testified before the Senate and agreed that the second generation cutoff must be immediately removed and returned to a one-parent rule for Indian status. There was also a historic unanimous vote at Senate to support Bill S2 with the amendments, and the amendments that the Senate didn't dream up. These were amendments that First Nations and First Nations women brought forward and said, this is what we want. Since then, the majority of First Nations and First Nation organizations who made written submissions to ISK about how to address the ongoing discrimination in the second generation cutoff rule suggested a one-parent rule, just like what's in the S2 amendments. More than 77% of the hundreds of individuals who submitted feedback to ISK on the feedback form said we must go back to a one-parent rule. We have a birthright to be a part of excuse me, we have a birthright. And the official petition that was sponsored by MP Lori Idlu got 14,298 signatures saying pass Bill S2 as amended. All of this would be consistent with Section 35 Aboriginal and treaty rights in the Constitution that require absolute equality between male and female people. Section 15 equality rights in the Charter, which absolutely prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex, race, or ethnic origin. The non-discrimination laws in the Canadian Human Rights Act, which also prohibit discrimination on the basis of sex, race, or ethnic origin. The UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide condemns any actions by states who attempt to destroy in whole or part a racial or ethnic group. And of course, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which absolutely guarantees the right of individuals to be part of their Indigenous nations and also guarantees absolute equality between male and female people and condemns any form of racism. And of course, there are more Supreme Court of Canada cases than I can cite here in 5 minutes, but all of them are consistent. The federal government has no legal option, authority, jurisdiction, or legal ability to continue discrimination. It is said financial considerations cannot justify an infringement of charter equality rights. Administrative inconvenience or having to change their internal policies and processes. None of that can justify an ongoing charter violation. It's also said that you cannot act on incrementalism, that groups that have been historically the target of discrimination cannot be expected to wait patiently for the protection of their human rights, or equality rights are just an illusion. And it goes on and on and on and on. So at the end of the day, the government has no legal authority to discriminate on the basis of sex, race, ethnic origin, and it certainly cannot promote the legislative extinction of First Nations in any form. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And next, we will go to Marjolaine Etienne, the president of the Quebec Native Women Inc. You have 5 minutes, please.
Oui, bonjour. Je m'appelle Marjolaine.
Hello, my name is Marjolaine Etienne, and I represent Quebec Native Women, an organization founded in 1974 that represents and advocates for the rights of First Nations women in Quebec, whether they live in urban areas or in communities. For more than 50 years, Quebec Native Women has been working to denounce and correct the discrimination that is embedded in the Indian Act, which is a colonial law that has profoundly shaped our way of life, our customs, and our values. The imposition of the Indian Act has had lasting effects that continue to have a profound impact on our communities, particularly on women and their children. For more than 50 years, Indigenous women have been speaking out against the inequalities created by this law and have been actively involved in various reform processes. These efforts have led to several significant legislative changes, notably in 1985, 2010, 2017, and now Bill S2. Experience has shown, however, that when reforms are partial or incomplete, they often serve to perpetuate discrimination rather than eliminate it. Bill S2, therefore, represents a significant and, above all, decisive opportunity to bring about a lasting remedy to a situation that has persisted for far too long. Today, QNW reaffirms its support for Bill S2 as amended by the Senate last November. Amendments which incidentally were proposed and supported by QNW in its presentation to the Senate and in its submission to the Standing Senate Committee on Indigenous Peoples. The support is based on a key conviction. Bill S2 can only achieve its objective if it enables inequalities to be corrected in a meaningful and lasting way. In practical terms, these inequalities stem from the current rules governing the transmission of status, and more specifically from the rule of exclusion after the second generation cutoff rule. This rule limits the ability to pass on status from one generation to the next and disproportionately affects Indigenous women. Even when they have regained their status, many Indigenous women cannot pass it on to their children or grandchildren in the same way that is permitted for Indigenous men married to non-Indigenous women. This situation perpetuates gender-based discrimination, which successive reforms have failed to eliminate. To better understand the concrete effects of this provision, Quebec Native Women conducted interviews with women from different nations and generations directly affected by the second generation cutoff rule. This initiative aimed to document the actual impacts of the law based on the lived experiences of the women affected. The findings are clear. The women reported instances of exclusion from services and community spaces, which manifest as a loss of access to housing, healthcare, education, attacks on their identity and sense of belonging, disruptions in cultural and family transmission, the loss of traditional roles, as well as a climate of fear, stigmatization, and tension within the communities. These effects are not isolated. They accumulate and intensify from one generation to the next, weakening families and threatening the continuity of nations. Passing Bill S2 without abolishing the second generation cutoff rule would amount to maintaining discrimination and inequalities whose impacts are now well known and documented. The central recommendation of Quebec Native Women is clear. It's essential to repeal this provision to ensure true equality between Indigenous women and men in terms of the transmission of status. This adoption must be accompanied by a concrete, tailored implementation plan that provides the necessary funding for First Nations decision-making bodies to avoid unnecessary tensions and preserve community cohesion. To conclude, Bill S2 offers a real opportunity to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past. Its adoption, along with the Senate's amendments and the recommendations of Quebec Native women, would represent a concrete step towards equity, justice, and dignity. It's also necessary to recognize that the Indian Act, since its adoption 150 years ago, has caused and continues to cause profound and lasting harm, the effects of which are disproportionately borne by women and their children. And we actually base our recommendations on the equality between Indigenous men and women, as well as international tools and mechanisms that exist. The UNDRIP, for instance, or the General Recommendation number 39, as well as the convention that aims to eliminate all discrimination against women. So the question today is simple. Are we going to wait another 40 years to address and resolve once and for all the root causes of these inequalities between Indigenous men and women? Indigenous women have waited long enough. Their children and grandchildren are still waiting. Now is the time to adopt a comprehensive, responsible, and enforceable reform. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
The members for questions, and first we have MP Billy Morin. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to go to Dr. Palmater first. Dr. Palmater, thank you for again testifying today. Can you tell me, is there hypocrisy in terms of the government saying they uphold UNDRIP, but they still don't want to take S2 to its full passing?
Thank you for the question. And I do feel like the government on this issue have been offside of the law and violating all of the laws. Now that they've passed UNDRIP and said UNDRIP is a part of Canadian law, and the Supreme Court of Canada has said UNDRIP is now positive law in Canada, and the federal government has an obligation to make sure all of its laws complies with UNDRIP at a minimum, never mind all the other laws. Of course, it is outside of UNDRIP in a whole bunch of articles, and this only serves to hurt our children and grandchildren.
Thank you. Are you aware if Inuit and Métis have a one-parent rule for recognition under some legal status in terms of dealing with the federal government?
I can't speak to Métis and who is part of Métis. There's different organizations, Métis Settlements, Métis Nation. So I can't speak to that. And I'm also not Inuit. So I feel like that's a question that's probably better for Inuit. What I am aware of, however, is that there are self-government agreements that have determined citizenship codes that are based on one-parent rules. And the majority of First Nations that have band membership codes, out of the different types, the majority have one-parent rules. And then the First Nations I work with that are amending their membership codes are moving towards one-parent rules.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Sharon McIver next. And thank you for, was it 60 plus years of fighting this fight? I'm looking at some of the things from where I'm from. So I'm from Treaty 6 in Alberta, and obviously Status Indian from Enoch Cree Nation. So I live this every day as well. One of the articles from February 9th, 2025, the headline is, First Nations life expectancy is 19 years lower than other Albertans in Treaty 6, 7, and 8 in Alberta. 19 years lower than the Canadian average in Alberta. You mentioned that it took you 30 plus years to get a court result in terms of having your son recognized as a part of your family. How many how many more people will perish just trying to be a part of their own families in the battle to be recognized under status?
Well, the legislation in 1985 was designed to exterminate us, and that second generation rule, I pushed it back from my son to my grandchildren. My great-grandchildren are not eligible for status. So I with all of the work that I did on that particular case, it was pushed back just another generation. And so the termination doesn't come with my grandchildren, it comes with my great-grandchildren. But what was really important and why I talked about the time is that during my case, the government adjourned it over and over, and because of the process, we weren't even able to get a court date. And my son was 14 when we started, and we got a good decision in our favor. But he was 44 when he was registered, and this has happened all along with the stalling. They knew that when they made the legislation. When you guys made the legislation, you knew that it was going to it was still discriminatory, and that was what was going to happen. So,
who's you guys?
You guys that make laws. And I'm talking about, you know, I represent my nation and all of the people that came before me. And you guys are in the same position. You're here making laws. And those that made the laws in 1920, that's your responsibility. You have a responsibility, a fiduciary duty to us by virtue of Section 9124. And you're not upholding that. You're actually making us be extinct by not recognizing us.
Thank you. And then for Marjolaine Etienne, Stats Canada says Indian status population is growing by 4.1%. I believe the number that I have for the average Canadian population is 5.5%. This is actually way lower. I think there is a common theme out there that Indigenous population is growing, but I also recognize that it's the self-identified population that's growing. But status Indianship is its own technical box, and it's only growing by 4.1%. And then I seen a few different stats in terms of when status Indian population will peak. Right here on the Stats Canada website, it says it won't peak before 2041, but there's nothing after that. There's no sentence that says it will keep growing after 2041. So one can safely assume that it will peak eventually and things will go down and entire communities are extinct. Have you heard fears from Quebec or some of the women that you represent that their communities will go extinct in their lifetime?
We're out of time right now, MP Morin, so I'm sure you can bring that out in more exchanges that will happen as well. But we have to move on to our next person, which is Jaime, for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to start off by thanking all of you for your advocacy for so many years. It's because of your advocacy for so many years we're at a point in this government's history, in Canadian history, where we're looking at how to get rid of a second-generation cutoff. And I think the overall sentiment that we've heard and we understand is that it's time for us to get rid of these restrictive second-generation cutoff rules. However, when exploring this, and you know, it's one of these amazing things that, you know, not too many legislations actually get discussed within our First Nations community, but I was looking at Facebook yesterday and I saw people saying, what is your thoughts on S2? And I was interested, so I was looking through, and you know, there was about, I'd say, 1/3 of the people saying it's time to just go with a one-parent rule. Others were unsure, and the others were saying that, well, it's a First Nations community right to determine their own membership. And with this conversation, you know, that's the crux of this. I think that we all want to figure out how to move away from second-generation cutoff. But you know, if we look at the actual, what Article 33 of UNDRIP states, is that it recognizes that the inherent right of Indigenous people to determine their own identity and membership in accordance with their customs and tradition. And so Pam, we've been working together on this for more than 15 years, back when I was the Mi'kmaq Citizenship Coordinator in Nova Scotia, and you were talking to people about what this problem was, flagging for, more than a decade why we need to do this. And so I guess I'm going to turn it over to you first. There are those that believe that it's not the government's responsibility. It should be the community's responsibility to determine their own membership, while you're advocating that we just have a one-parent solution that applies to everyone, every community. Make the argument for those people at home.
Okay, thank you so much, Jaime. It's been great working with you. First, I want to make very clear, there is a legal difference between Indian status, which is what we're talking about with Bill S2, band membership under sections 10 and 11 of the Indian Act, and self-government citizenship. So bands, First Nations already have the legal option to become a Section 10 band, develop their own membership codes in consultation with their communities, and manage their own membership. However, the majority of bands have chosen not to. So they're Section 11 bands, which means if someone's registered as an Indian, they're automatically a band member. The reasons why I have heard that that's the case is because many First Nations don't want to assume the legal liability of all of the discrimination that continues under Indian status. They want that cleaned up first, and then they will pass their own membership codes. But so this isn't a question of membership. If a First Nation wants to determine membership, they already can. Totally separate issue. And it's the same with self-government. If a First Nation engages in that very long, sometimes 20-year process to negotiate a self-government agreement and not use the Indian Act, they can determine their own citizenship rules. So all of these options already exist. S2 is talking about the federal obligation, the federal responsibilities vis-a-vis Indian status individuals. And so the federal government doesn't have a legal option not to end the discrimination that's been ongoing.
So if I could continue down that line of thinking, so would it be a situation if we were to carry S2 where there would be status Indians that were recognized by the federal government, but that would not be recognized by their communities? And how do we balance that?
So that's already the current situation. There are people who are registered and not affiliated with their First Nations because since 1985, First Nations have had the ability to adopt their own membership codes, which include a lot of different criteria. However, they're in the minority. For the majority of bands, that wouldn't be an issue. And then of the bands that do have their own membership codes, that would be a very small minority, which is already the current situation. Nothing about S2 changes that. And then bands would have to look at their own membership codes to make sure that they're in compliance with their own traditional laws, human rights laws, constitutional rights and laws, and of course, UNDRIP. But that is a separate question. And again, we're just talking about a minority that already exists. Indian Affairs already has a separate list for those that are unaffiliated.
45 seconds of this. I'm wondering if there are communities that don't want the one-parent rule, and I'd say that's about 25 to 30% right now from what I've heard. Should we force this on them, or should this be something that they opt into?
No, definitely. There is no ability for any First Nation to say, I'm going to opt out of Charter Equality Rights, Constitutional Equality Rights, UNDRIP Equality Rights, Human Rights Act Equality Rights. Human rights and equality is a one-size-fits-all. We all have equality in this country. It's not an option.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Deputy Gill, 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
MP Gill, for 6 minutes, please. Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to thank all the witnesses who are with us today once again, because we met with some of you a couple of weeks ago when we were doing another study, maybe a bit more comprehensive, but similar nonetheless. It's an honor to be able to converse with you, especially with Ms. McIver. We're here to talk about S2, and I'm seeing that the discussion revolved around the amendments. I would be in favor of keeping the amendments of the Senate, of course. Not everyone agrees on that, maybe. But passing this bill with amendments of the Senate will be the right thing to do. Ms. McIver also referred to this. The Indian Act is a colonial piece of legislation. That is true. We are lawmakers, of course. And as the spokesperson for Indigenous Affairs, I always try to be careful when there's a perception that maybe a nation is deciding on the future of another nation or other nations. So they should be able to make decisions for their own nations with regard to membership rights and putting an end to the second-generation cutoff rule. So I'd like to hear from you if we are ready, if First Nations are ready to express themselves on S2, and what would it mean for you if the amendments were not to be included in the bill? Are we ready? Can we go ahead? And is it complete? Is it comprehensive without the amendments? Let's start with Ms. Etienne and then Ms. McIver and then Ms. Palmater. And if we run out of time, you can always provide written submissions to the committee. Thank you. Do I have time?
Le temps de répondre. C'est intéressant de voir un peu les questions qui sont.
Well, it's quite interesting to hear the questions that come up this morning. It takes me back to certain points in time and certain memories. This bill concerns women, families, children in our communities. This bill needs to be adopted with the amendments of the Senate. I was clear in my opening remarks. I've always had the same position, and I stand with First Nations women across Canada and in Quebec because there are inequalities that have been perpetuated for many years. We are all born equal. The Indian Act has existed for 150 years. Since 1985, for 40 years, we've had evolutions in this matter because the populations change and young people go on to have children of their own. So there's constant evolution, which allows an increase in the number of registered children, rather. So this bill needs to be adopted once and for all. In Indigenous communities, of course, they have self-governance processes that are specific to these nations, and that needs to be respected. But when it comes to the consultation, and I, as a representative of Quebec Native Indigenous women, I've been able to consult with a group of women, for instance, that we have known over time, but I don't have access to a list of individuals who apply to be registered. That's confidential information, and it's okay. But the consultation doesn't really take place. We have 54 Indigenous communities in Quebec, so we need a process that is done for and by women in these communities. It's not just registration that is the issue. You also have the mental health of Indigenous women, the financial situation of women. It impacts education and access to healthcare services. These are fundamental rights. That is why I am in favor of this bill, including the General Recommendation number 39, because we see the word women 3 times, I think, sections 20 and 21. But the General Recommendation 39 was adopted in November 2022, and I worked with Indigenous women internationally to make sure that this General Recommendation 39 reflects the rights of Indigenous women globally. So, again, we must pass this bill with the amendments passed by the Senate. Thank you very much, Ms. Etienne. and maybe we'll continue with Ms. McIver. For some communities in Quebec, maybe we're already seeing this, but I will well, of course it had impacts across Quebec. In other Indigenous communities across Canada as well, there have been impacts. It's really something we need to be mindful of. I am from the Mashayat Innu Nation, and I'm proud to be a member of that community, of that nation. And I imagine other children would also like to have the right to be able to say that. I submitted a report to the committee, which of course doesn't cover every situation that's imaginable, but there's still exclusion, unfortunately, happening to children, and the children do not deserve this. They deserve to have the community spaces where they can know and be fully aware of being children of First Nations by being part of the cultural life of a community. So we see the real impact in the communities and especially on children. So we have to put an end to all of this once and for all. And with the passing of this legislation, hopefully things will be better. As I was saying, we are all born equal, but this situation has changed a lot of things in our cultural ways of living. And residential schools also had a similar impact because Indigenous women had their roles to play in all of that. And they have a role to play in transmitting cultural know-how, including the mother tongues of these communities. If women are not recognized and if there's still inequality, well, then it's no wonder that in the near future, our nations will be weakened. So all that women represent are of key importance at that point. And I'm talking about my personal experience, and I will end on this as an elected woman in my community, as a woman who lived in my community. I can tell you that women have important roles in our communities. So we need to be able to go down this path and pass the bill.
We have for this question. Now we move to the second round, and MP Morin will have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to go back to Dr. Palmater. Sharon McIver mentioned that, was it Sharon, I'm going to get to Palmater, but was it 125,000 on the McIver case? That approximately?
That's approximate, yes.
Approximate. Dr. Palmater, are you aware of some of the numbers in terms of the S3 considerations here if the bill passed? What are some of the numbers that you're aware of in terms of people that it would affect, effects on the budget, how many people annually it would come into effect to, and could a $20 billion to $25 billion ISC budget handle this?
I think this is one of the most important questions because it gives me an opportunity to kind of clear up any misinformation that might be out on social media. At every single stage, whether it was C31 in 1985, Bill C10 in 2010 or 11, S3 and S2, there's always been some fear mongering around millions of people will be added overnight. It will bankrupt First Nations. And of course, the government can't afford it. We know that's not the case. The numbers have been markedly lower. I mean, look at the numbers that Sharon just referenced. We know here with Bill S2, we have very specific numbers, and assuming that everyone is still alive and that everyone applies and everyone who applies qualifies, we know that over the next 40 years, there's going to be roughly 320,000 people that could potentially be eligible. That's divided amongst 634 First Nations. On an annual basis, the maximum number here is 7,500 divided amongst 634 First Nations. So we're not even talking about thousands per First Nation. We're talking at best hundreds, depending on what the relative population is. And in terms of impact on federal budgets, we know from the last time when we looked at Bill S3, those amendments, the Parliamentary Budget Officer looked at this claim, will there be millions added? And categorically said, no, millions won't be added. The number was much, much lower. And even the lower number that would be added, if they all applied and qualified and were alive, that there would be no net burden on First Nations, that the majority of those who applied lived off reserve, wouldn't be moving back to reserve, and any programs they did access, and not all of them would be from the federal government side, and that those the funding would be minimal. And I guess I will just reiterate the point from the Supreme Court of Canada. Cost increases to budgets can never be used to deny charter rights. So even if there was going to be a huge impact on the budget, that's not an excuse to not address charter rights. But we know that there won't be a huge impact to budget and that the numbers are very small for First Nations.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to Sharon McIver. I think actually reconciliation in this country is at a crossroads. Canada and First Nations people, Indigenous people, Métis and Inuit are going to exist for time immemorial going forward too. But sometimes it feels like it's taken one step forward, two steps back. A lot of the words like reconciliation, nation to nation are used. You had to do a 30-plus year fight in a court case. You have been fighting this for 60 years, citing things going back to the 60s, including the first status Indian person in Parliament. Would, going forward, is there still people behind you to keep this going if S2 doesn't pass with amendments?
Well, of course, I'm mentoring people, and they're gladly being mentored because I will die before any of this really has a reality. So that's the big thing, but we keep missing or messing up. Okay, self-government, self-determination has nothing to do with that. Right now, and what I've always wanted is we've been targeted as Indigenous women to break down our communities. If we're not there, we can't pass on the language and the status. And so they targeted us, and we're not the only ones. United States, all of the colonized countries have done this. And all I'm saying, it is your responsibility, you guys, well, and women too, but your responsibility. And all I've ever wanted is for us to be put back to where we should have been had you not interfered with our families. That's all. And then when we're there and we're back, we can decide, we can participate on what are we going to do going forward. That's all.
Thank you very much. That's all the time we have. Okay, Deputy Levesque for 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank all of our witnesses for the relentless work and your perseverance on these important files. It's really important work, and we are really grateful to you. So we all recognize that the Indian Act is deeply problematic and discriminatory. The main objective of this bill was enfranchisement, but of course there's the issue of the second generation cutoff. But of course, we need to be guided by a fundamental principle, that is to recognize the Indigenous community's right to self-determination, and including coming up with the rules of membership of their nation. So are we fixing the problem of the second generation cutoff? How do we go about doing it? And how do we do it in a way that's respectful of First Nations communities? Of course, there's been criticism that the government is imposing rules and regulations. So I'd like to hear from you. given the context with the legislation that is before us, does it really respect the right of First Nations communities to decide on their membership rules and regulations, or are we perpetuating further interference in these fundamental decisions if we follow down this path? Any one of our witnesses, please. I'll go ahead. It's a very important question and a very interesting one as well. And let me explain why I said that. There is governance at the local level that also needs to be respected. When the federal government came up with the Indian Act, and you summarized things well, I think we are all aware of the history here, the main turning points in the histories of First Nations and the main issues impacting Indigenous women. We are all aware. So how do we go forward? How do we do this? The how is important because there are rules and procedures that need to be respected, the local governance, the legislation in place, etc. But the main question here is that if we let First Nations to have their own procedures to consult with their members and their population, because it's an important process and it's an important step. And if the federal government is open to learning with the timing of things, it will take a lot more time once again. Are we going to wait another 40 years? And in the meantime, what do we do with Indigenous women who have been crying out this injustice to their dignity? What do we do? We have a very good example of the time period from 1985 to today. Before 1985, of course, Ms. McIver and others were involved in the struggle before 98 as well. There were others too. But the same issue, the same problem of inequalities comes back time and again. So women regained their status, but then we had 40 years. We had C-38 that died on the order paper and other attempts and initiatives, but the harmful effects have continued on Indigenous women. If we try to focus on the how and the subtleties, well, that's good, but we also have to have a plan in place. What do we do with Indigenous women who were able to regain their status, but what happens with their children and grandchildren? That's also part of the discussion here, because we can no longer let this inequality between Indigenous men and women continue. Well, with all due respect, of course, Indigenous men who marry non-Indigenous women, or on the other hand, you have Indigenous women who marry non-Indigenous individuals, it's not the same thing. So that is the rhetoric that we have before us, and it has been the case for years and years, and this creates tensions and confrontation in our communities. That needs to come to an end. I lived that transition in 1985 when Indigenous women regained their status. But in the communities, this caused difficulties and challenges in families.
Time we have next, we have Deputy Gill. 2.5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. I will let Ms. McIver and Ms. Palmater to answer my previous questions. Are we ready to adopt this bill, pass this bill? Should the Senate amendments be included? That's my question. Please go ahead. I leave the floor to you.
Okay. Yes, it should be included and no more amendments. This is looking at a past problem that has to be solved before we go out and consult. You cannot consult whether or not you have to live up to your equality rights. And the government passed the legislation in 1985 that said we had equality rights. And so, consultation, what are we going to do with the communities? Who should have say? We've got to take care of the problem of all of us who've been excluded, and we've got 25% of the registered Indians today are 6'2s. They cannot pass their status on. And, you know, we've got numbers there, but the next generation, they're going to die out and they can't pass their status on. We've got to take care of that. It has always been a one-parent rule. Canadian citizenship is a one-parent rule, and it doesn't expire. We've always had a one-parent rule. Even when the legislation came in and interfered with it, there was a one-parent rule, but the one-parent rule had to be the man. We couldn't pass a definition of Indian in the Indian Act was a man, his wife, and his children. Indian man, and wife, and his children. We couldn't pass it on. So we've got to fix that. That's all. I mean, we don't have to talk about all of this generation stuff. Fix the problem, fix the ongoing discrimination, and all of these things that we're talking about, okay, what are the communities going to do? What is the input in the communities? Membership is already in the hands of the community if that's what they want. And that's what we're talking about. They can do it today. And so we keep muddying the water, saying, oh, we got to consult the communities if this is what they want. They didn't go and consult the communities when they kicked us all out as women. Did they go say, oh, is it okay if we kick your women out? They didn't. They just did it. And then when they tried to do the legislation to get us back in that resulted in C-31 in 1985, they didn't go and, well, they said they wanted to consult, but they can't consult. They discriminated against us. We're in a mess out there. Missing and murdered Indigenous women has been directly attributed to the ongoing discrimination in the Indian Act. So no, we've got to get S2 through with the amendments it has now, and then we can talk about, okay, and over and over and over again, all of the bands in the country have the right to decide who their members are. So this has nothing to do with the government forcing something on them. They're just fixing a problem that they've put off for years. In 1982, when they did this study, they knew this new legislation was discriminatory. They knew it. And there's a lot of evidence. And when we did S2 in the Senate, they admitted, the government admitted, yeah, we know this is discrimination. And now we'll consult on somebody how to do it. No, we've got to pass S2 with the amendments that were made in the Senate, and then we'll go on to our next fight.
Thank you very much, Sharon. MP Morin, please. You are next.
No, thank you. I'm going to ask Ms. Palmater to answer Madam Gill's question.
Thank you. I think for everyone's questions, yes, the Indian Act is racist. It's colonial, it's oppressive, it's paternalistic. None of us like it. None of us want it. However, First Nations have been clear since the 1969 White Paper forward. The Indian Act cannot be repealed until we've resolved all of the other federal obligations. With the Indian Act, this Bill S2, we're talking about Indian status, not band membership, not self-government citizenship. Bands already have the option to do that. So we need to focus on Indian status. What is that? Indian status is federal law, federal legislation subjected to all laws in Canada, including the Charter, including constitutional rights, including Canadian Human Rights Act. So the federal government must clean its mess, address all of this historic discrimination that's impacting our kids now before it says, oh, and in addition to membership and in addition to self-government, would you also like to have Indian status, or do you want Indian status in the future? That's a long-term conversation because the Indian Act's not going anywhere anytime soon. And every day that it exists, it cannot discriminate on the basis of ethnic origin, family status, sex, or race. And so this is a federal obligation. It applies nationally. There can't be discrimination in Indian status. First Nations can do what they like under membership if they choose to. Most are waiting for the feds to clean up their mess. So yes, pass Bill S2 as exactly amended by Senate.
30 seconds.
Don't allow ISK to come in and suggest a whole bunch of amendments.
Thank you. So we've talked a little bit about numbers in terms of budget, registry. We've talked about a lot of the human rights aspects of this, the charter rights of this. What about the legalities of this in terms of Dr. Palmater, yourself being a lawyer? If action was taken by individuals, so, you know, in such a complicated issue, we had S3, we had C31, I think before that in 2011, there was another change in terms of the Indian Act. But going forward, should there be action from Canadians who are being excluded when it comes to the amendments in the second generation cutoff? I'm sure it'll be another long fight, but do they have, given the history and the incrementalism, do you think there's it probably would take a long time, but can you comment, would it be successful if they took it to court?
In my opinion, of course it would. It's been clear in all of the cases, McIver case, Deschanel, Gale, the Nicholas case, all of the ones that have been brought before the UN, which resulted in C31, C3, S3, and now S2, they've all been successful. And at every stage, it's been clear, yes, Indian registration violates the charter, and that's not acceptable. And so Indian registration has to be amended. However, the problem here is the government's doing it in a piecemeal fashion, which the Supreme Court of Canada has said in a large number of cases, you cannot do that. There's no such thing as incremental equality. It cannot just mess around with the limited circumstances of one case. It must address all of the discrimination in Indian registration. So if the feds don't pass S2 as exactly amended by the Senate, and they try to force amendments or not even pass the legislation, anyone that's currently excluded, of course, has a significant legal claim. But do we need to force them to spend the next 20 years fighting this when we know our kids die? The biggest cause of death is suicide. We know murdered and missing Indigenous women. You were mentioning the lower lifespan. Are we really going to let more of our people pass away before they see justice?
Thank you very much.
That's not fair to us.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Jaime, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm just curious because when we're looking at the Nicholas case, which is the case that this whole legislation is based on, C38, S2, it was my understanding that the court was ruling on the enfranchisement pieces and not the second generation cutoff or Section 6. Can anyone tell me if there's a precedent out there that has ruled that the second generation cutoff is discriminatory? Because I think it's restrictive, but I've yet to see a court case that says it's actually discriminatory. So can you guys point out to the court which decision actually referred to the second generation cutoff as discriminatory?
Before you answer, just for everybody who's watching, we can't take pictures or videos whilst the testimony is going on. So when we're done and in between, we can do pictures, just so we know. So thank you very much, and I apologize for interrupting, but go ahead and answer the question, please.
If anyone wants to give me the case law on that, I'd love to read the case.
Pamela has her hand up. Pamela, you have your hand up?
Can I respond? I can't hear if anyone's speaking.
No, go for it, Pam.
Oh, okay. So the United Nations, in a large number of cases that have been brought before the Human Rights Committee or the Committee for the Elimination of Discrimination of Women, like in the Matson case and McIver case and others, have said very specifically these arbitrary cutoffs, including second gen, including the 1985 cutoff and others, is clearly discriminatory and has called on Canada to immediately remedy that. The other issue is the Deschanel was very specific about Canada not just remedying the issue in Deschanel, similar to Nicholas, not just remedying the issue in Nicholas, but to address all of the remaining discrimination. And the great thing about the Nicholas case is that it has said, look, if you need an extension to address this in a more fulsome way, because the feds have acknowledged that this discrimination in Indian status is bigger, then please go ahead. So I think there's more than enough precedent, adding in all the Supreme Court of Canada cases that say no, because we know it's discriminatory on the basis of race. It's based on blood purity. It's based on blood quantum. That's in the federal government's own documents. We know it's discriminatory on the basis of sex, ethnic origin. The feds have already admitted that.
I just want to get a clarification, though. So, but what we're saying is that, you know, all of these cases dealt with the discrimination that was in there versus women, which is 1985 for sure, Bill C-31, S3 absolutely, but Section 6.1 and 6.2 apply equally to male and female. I'm going to lose my grandchildren potentially, well, not my grandchildren, but potentially a great-grandchild if this was just like a female. So the gender discrimination I don't see currently within this context. Can someone explain to me, I mean, prior to 1985, S3, all of these, but the current discussion we're having around second-generation cutoff, is it not equally applicable to male and female?
Can I?
Not. It hits the females first. And there is situations where children are born, because it's a two-parent rule, children are born as a result of incest or rape or whatever, and there's not a father put. It's not the father that's denying the child. It's the woman in times gang rape, it hits the women. The man has the right, can say, okay, that's my child. The woman doesn't have the right to say, that's not my child. So it hits her first, and there are cases, especially on the gang rape. So the child does not have status.
Talking about the non-stated paternity section that this doesn't deal with. In my previous study, I hoped to take that on, but this is not included within the amendments here, the non-stated paternity issue that we were trying to resolve in the previous study. But how does it applicable to this current legislation?
Say, go ahead, Pam, okay? You say, go ahead, Pam. She can't hear us.
Pam, go ahead. She can't hear us. Right? You're on mute.
And you have 25 seconds, Pam.
Okay, 25 seconds. There's a whole bunch of issues here. The Supreme Court of Canada has already settled that text in law that looks neutral, sex neutral, equal on its face, but has disproportionate impacts, is still discriminatory. One specific example, the vast majority of single parent families are headed by First Nation women. Those who have families where their kids aren't Indian status, they can't access all of the supports they need, where a single man obviously gets to have Indian status for their children. It's easily provable, so they don't suffer the same rates. And there's a whole bunch of different examples that we can put in a submission to you of how it impacts First Nation women separately now, post-1985.
Thank you very much, and we look forward to that submission as well. Really appreciate the testimony today, and thank you for starting this study, this very important study. So thank you to all our presenters. We are going to suspend temporarily while we get our next panel ready. So please suspend. everyone to have take a seat, please. And the next round of questions, we have online the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs, Grand Chief Kyra Wilson. We have Justice for Girls, Zoe Craig Sparrow, Vice President. And then the Michael Calhoun Nation Society, we have Troy Chalifu, and the Southern Chiefs Organization, Inc., Grand Chief Jerry Daniels, and Sandra Hodzik, Chief Advisor. So we're going to start in the room, and we're going to start with Zoe. We'll go this way, left to right, my left to this right. So thank you very much, Zoe. You have 5 minutes.
My mic on?
Yep.
Perfect. All right. Start my timer. Aiswale, good day. Antha Zoe Craig Sparrow, Tlitsnak Musqueam. My name is Zoe Craig Sparrow. I am from the Hunkaminam speaking Musqueam peoples. Was born and raised on our reserve number 2 in Vancouver, British Columbia. Thank you for having me here to speak today on the traditional territory of the Algonquin peoples. I want to be very clear. I am in strong support of Bill S2, exactly as amended by Senate. And I urge for it to be passed through this committee with the priority and urgency that it calls for. You've heard a lot about the second generation cutoff. I am the cutoff. My mother is full 6-1 status, and my father was not status, so I was granted 6-2 status, half status. My father passed away when I was 9 years old, and I grew up on the reserve with my mother, next door to my grandma, my aunt, my grandpa, Ed Sparrow, who raised me fishing on the Fraser River. I met my now fiancé on Musqueam, who's not a status Indian, but also grew up on the reserve. And we're getting married in October and plan to have kids shortly thereafter. Our children will not have status. In the eyes of the government, they will not be First Nations. They will not be able to inherit my home that I own right next to my mother's. And they will not be able to exercise their Aboriginal right to fish. A right so important not only to my Sparrow family, as it was secured through the Sparrow decision, but to the Musqueam people as a whole. In contrast, if my parents were both status Indians, they would. If my fiancé was a status Indian, they would. Or if I was a man who'd had children before 1985, they would. This is not just a violation of my rights to equality and to pass on my culture and identity. It means that I cannot pass down the home that I worked hard to purchase. It means I cannot pass on the teachings of our family business, fishing, which was taught to me and my siblings by my mother and grandfather, who learned it from his father, who learned it from his, and so on. My babies won't even be allowed to be on the boat with me while I fish. When we say this will lead to the legal extinction of First Nations in 3 to 4 generations, we mean an extinction of entire nations and peoples. But this is happening right now with real implications for people and families like mine. I'm the first generation of my family that, after the intergenerational trauma of residential school, can raise my children in a stable home in our community, free from violence and addiction. My mother broke the cycle, and I am the first to start fresh. My grandpa fought so hard to survive residential school and see his little family, as he calls us, succeed. And he is so proud of me, especially being here today. But isn't that what reconciliation is? Giving us a chance to rebuild our lives, culture, family, and rights that were stolen from us. I'm the first in my family to go to university, and I'm the first in my family whose children will not have status. And I wouldn't have been able to go to university without the ISK funding. And I want to make a note here about funding and costs, as I know that's a hang-up for a lot of people. Will passing Bill S2 as amended lead to more status Indians? Absolutely, that is the point. It will ensure we do not go legally extinct and prevent assimilation and genocide. But that number is far lower than some people fear. The Stats Canada estimate, as Pam shared, is about 320,000 newly entitled status Indians over the next 45 years. That's about 7,000 a year. And this pales in comparison to the number of new Canadian citizens born because Canadians have a birthright, and the hundreds and thousands of new Canadians we welcome every year, and we see all these people as a good thing. We are asking for legislation that would see 300,000 new Indians over 45 years and prevent our extinction. I don't understand how these costs can be seen as a bad thing. And while yes, these newly entitled status Indians may lead to increased government costs and funding, in the long run, it's actually a cost-saving measure. I think about me, for example, someone who would not have been able to access and graduate from post-secondary without the funding and support of the federal government. Did that cost the government money initially? Yes. but it also allowed me to get good grades in my undergraduate degree that set me up for scholarships for my master's and doctoral programs. It allowed me to get a job with healthcare, so I didn't have to rely on government-funded, non-insured health benefits. Healthcare that will now extend to my children. It has set me up for a life where, fortunately, I don't have to rely on social welfare funding. Without that investment in me and my future as a child, who knows where I would have ended up or how much more money me and my children would be costing the federal government. Respectfully, it's about how you look at the situation. If all you want to see is the initial bottom line of the budget increasing, that's all you're going to see. But if you look closer, you'll see this is a low-barrier investment that protects rule of law and equality in this country and prevents the extinction of First Nations people. It seems like a win-win to me. I'll conclude with this. The second-generation cutoff is not a new issue. It has been studied, litigated, consulted on, reported on, and condemned for more than 40 years by courts, parliamentary committees, UN treaty bodies, and by Indigenous leaders and women. We do not need more consultation. Even so, you cannot consult on gender and race discrimination, and you cannot consult on genocide, and you cannot legally use consultations as a weapon to delay equality that I and my family need now, today. People's rights are being violated now. Every day that passes that we allow extinction documents to be a part of the legal backbone of our country is a day too many. I implore you, follow the lead of Senate and act swiftly and decisively in passing Bill S2 as amended. You have an historic opportunity here to stop this pattern of piecemeal amendments and delayed equality. Please don't make me fight my whole life, like Sharon McIver, just to see justice delayed time and time again. Hi, Sabka. Thank you.
Thank you. Michelle Calhoun, Nation Society, will have 5 minutes, and I believe Bev is going to be reading on behalf of someone who was not able to attend today. So go ahead, Bev.
Morning, everyone. Last second.
I don't see your mic on. Can we get mic on 14?
Oh, there we go.
Thank
Is it
you.
on now? Okay. Thank you, everyone. I'm a little frazzled because I wasn't supposed to be speaking today. My colleague Rosalind was supposed to be here. This is her story that she's asked me to read for her, so I'll do my very best to honor her words. So I will just start with saying that we acknowledge that we're on the traditional territory of the Algonquin Nation. And good morning to everyone, honorable delegate members, dignitaries. So my name is Beverly Asman. I am a member of the Michelle Calhoun Nation Society. I was honored to testify at the Senate on behalf of this bill back in October. So I'm now going to read Rosalind's story. She says, I am the great-great-granddaughter of Michelle Calhoun, who signed Treaty 6 by way of adhesion in 1878. I am here as a director of the Michelle Calhoun Nation Society, the representative group that has been in exploratory discussions with Canada since 2022. For my part, I have spent the last 44 years advocating for justice for the Michelle descendants. First visiting Ottawa in 1982 to research our story in the archives. Some of our other directors have similarly spent decades seeking reconciliation for the Michelle Band descendants. Joining me today at the witness table is Troy Shellifu of the Maurice Law legal team. In attendance, along with myself, is Linda Buffalo, and we're missing another member who is supposed to be here as well. Before I continue, I wish to acknowledge and thank the directors Brandy Calhoun and myself, Beverly, who testified before the Standing Committee on Indigenous Peoples in October. Their voices helped carry the Michelle story forward, and I am honored to continue that advocacy here today before the House of Commons. Thank you for inviting me to provide testimony before you. I am here on behalf of all the descendants of the former Michelle Band number 472 to share our common story and to impress upon this committee the urgent need for Bill S2 to pass without further delay. First and foremost, we are signatories to Treaty 6, a sacred covenant that was to last as long as the sun shines, the river flows, and the grass grows. Until 1958, we were known as the Michelle Band 472 with Indian Reserve 132, and we were recognized band under the Indian Act. Today, our descendants represent the largest group who will become eligible for status with the passage of Bill S2. Indigenous Services Canada has estimated that approximately 3,500 individuals would be newly eligible for registration under this bill overall, and the Michelle descendants represent the largest group among them. This bill represents another vital step by Canada to address the long-standing inequities caused by enfranchisement. I've been advised by our legal counsel that this point is critically important, so please allow me to explain it plainly. The Michelle descendants cannot rely on the Nicholas court case to have our status reinstated. The Nicholas decision, which comes into effect April 30th, specifically excludes individuals who were members of a band that enfranchised under Section 112 of the Indian Act, and that is us. We are the only band in Canadian history to be collectively enfranchised under that provision. So while other victims of enfranchisement may find their remedy through the Nicholas case, we will not. Bill S2 is our only hope. To understand why we find ourselves in this position, you need to know a little bit about our history. The Michelle band members are the largest group in Canada who have suffered this discriminatory consequences of enfranchisement. Every member of the Michelle band, with the exception of 4 women who were deemed mentally incompetent under that law of that time, lost their status as a result of enfranchisement, either as individuals in 1928 or as a band as a whole in 1958. Prior to 1958, band enfranchisement, Section 111 of the Indian Act required a majority vote for voluntary enfranchisement. When this was proved unattainable, the government created Section 112 to accommodate the forced enfranchisement of our band as a whole. We were a test case, and it worked so devastatingly well that no other band was ever subject to this provision. The Michelle band story is one of continued atrocities and has been hidden in the darkness of Canadian history for far too long. While there is not enough time here today to share the full story, I have provided a brief history along with my testimony, but let me share with you the roots of our people so you understand what was taken from us. Our ancestors, the Cree and the Iroquois, have deep roots in this land. Since time immemorial, the Cree lived in the Northern Territory around what is now Edmonton. The Iroquois came west with our fur trade, and both communities became the ancestors of the Michelle band. My paternal ancestors were Iroquois who intermarried with the Cree. While my great-great-great-grandfather, Louis, settled in Jasper, his son Michel, along with his followers, signed the treaty in 1878. Michel chose the Indian Reserve 132 on the banks of the Sturgeon River, and according to the DIA surveyor, it was one of the best pieces of land in Western Canada. This is perhaps the reason European settlers began a letter campaign in the early 1900s seeking to buy the land, and provoked the subsequent illegal land surrection that stripped us of half our reserve.
Bev.
What happened next was systematically dismantling of our community, piece by piece.
Excuse me, Bev. That's all the time we have, but if you could submit the all of that paperwork,
Yeah.
Our analysts do an excellent job, and we'll incorporate
Okay, well,
it
then I'll just hand it over to Troy Shalafu if there's any questions.
And then yes, exactly. And then we're going to have some questions.
Okay,
and such.
thank you.
But thank you very much for that, stepping in and sharing that story. Okay, so next we have the Southern Chiefs Organization, and they'll have 5 minutes. Grand Chief, are you speaking?
I am.
Thank you, Grand Chief.
Good morning. I thank our Creator for a beautiful day. Just want to thank the Chair, members of the committee for the time today. My name is Jerry Daniels. I'm the Grand Chief for the Southern Chiefs Organization, representing 33 Anishinaabe Dakota Nations, which is more than 92 citizens across southern Manitoba. I'm honored to be here today and want to be direct with you. The Indian Act turns 150 years old this year. 150 years of federal government controlled who recognized who is status. For 150 years, it was decided who belongs, who doesn't, and who will eventually disappear. Parliament now has a responsibility, not just an opportunity, to correct what has been built into this law. And this committee is where that responsibility sits today. Since 1876, the Indian Act has imposed on our people who will be allowed. It dictated who's recognized as an Indian, create a system called enfranchisement, a process by which First Nations were stripped of their status, often involuntarily, in exchange for the most basic rights of Canadian citizenship, the right to vote, to own land, to become a doctor or a lawyer. These provisions fractured families, erased identities, and imposed gender-based discrimination that has traveled across generations into the present day. Bill S2 addresses that history directly. It seeks to restore status to the thousands of people who lost it through these unjust enfranchisement provisions. It addresses inequalities faced by women who were forced to transfer to their husbands, First Nation, rather than retain their own identity. And through the amendments added in the Senate, it takes aim at the most urgent ongoing justice of all, the second-generation cutoff. In 1985, the Indian Act created two categories of status, Section 6.1, Section 6.2. A person with 6.1 status could pass their status to their children regardless of who the other parent was. 6.2, not unless their parent also holds status. After 2 generations of parenting with a non-status person, the second generation receives nothing. They are cut off from their legal identity, their rights, their recognition as First Nations people under Canadian law. Let me be precise about what that means. Between 100,000 to 250,000 people have already lost their status as a result of this provision. Nationally, within 1 generation, 1 in 4 children born on reserve is expected to lack registered entitlement entirely. One senator described this as a bureaucratic extinction formula. I cannot think of a more accurate description. No other group in Canada faces a legislated pathway to extinction of their identity. No other group in Canada is told by law that their grandchildren will not be recognized as who they are. Councillor Rachel Ferreira of Roseau River Anishinaabe First Nation reminds us of the traditional ways. If you are 1% Anishinaabe, you are one of us. And yet her grandchildren, because of their father is Portuguese, risk having their status not recognized legally in Canada. Chief Donnie Smoke of Dakota Plains Wapata Nation has shared that this rule affects his own family. His grandchildren are proud Dakota people, they know who they are, but going without status makes them feel like outsiders in their own nation. I know a mother with 3 children. All 3 have the same non-Indigenous father, yet the oldest has status. Her 2 younger children do not, because of the year they were born. Changes in law, same mother, same father, same home, different rights. One child accesses dental care, vision care, and post-secondary education funding. The other 2 do not. That mother cannot explain to her children why the government of Canada sees them differently from their siblings. And I think about a young woman, accomplished healthcare professional, who found herself calculating whether the man she loved had status because she could not bear the thought of her own children being cut off from who they were. This law turns love into arithmetic. It turns family planning into a legal calculation. That is a psychological weight that this provision places on First Nations people every single day. Indian status is not symbolic. It carries real constitutional protected rights under Section 35 of the Constitution Act 1982, the right to hunt, fish, trap, gather plants, medicines, rights that apply regardless of band membership. Treaty rights go further still. They protect the deep, enduring connection to land, water, what is essential to the identity, culture, and continuity of treaty. When a child is denied status, they are not simply denied a card or a number. They are denied access to health care, education, funding, housing support, and legal recognition of their connection to their nation and their territory. Denying status to First Nation children is a denial of their rights and their identity. The Senate amended Bill S2 to introduce a one-parent rule, which allowed status to pass to children as long as the parent holds status in perpetuity. The Senate voted 10-1 in favor. Organizations representing First Nations across Canada supported it. The testimony was described by senators themselves as a reflection of the near and unanimous consensus among rights holders, Indigenous women organizations, legal experts, elders, and communities. Canada has acknowledged in its own words that the Indian Act was a tool for the wholesale erasure of languages, cultures, and beliefs that rob First Nations people of their identity. The second generation cutoff is that erasure continuing, updated, bureaucratized, and still in force in the 150th year of this legislation.
Thank you very
much. Our
much.
nation knows our people.
Thank you very much, Grand Chief.
Yeah, who our people
Daniels.
are, sorry.
Thank you very much. Now we're going to go online to Grand Chief Kyra Wilson, and hopefully we have a good connection here. I know we were working on that, so go ahead, Grand Chief Wilson.
Good morning. How is my audio?
Keep talking. Say a few things.
Perfect.
I'm looking at my interpreters.
All right. Good morning. My name is Kyra Wilson. Good? Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to speak to a very important matter. I know this is the second time that I've been able to speak to Bill S2, and I just want to say thank you to the previous speakers. My name is Kyra Wilson. I'm the Grand Chief for the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs, And I just want to say once again, good morning. And just in regards to the work that we do here at the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs, we represent 63 First Nations here within Manitoba. And so through the Section 6.2 of the Indian Act, Canada continues to legislate our nations out of existence. And so the position of AMC is very clear and has been very clear that Bill S2 must be passed in the House of Commons with the Senate amendments intact, including eliminating the second generation cutoff and restoring the one-parent rule. What we are seeing right now is legislated extinction. And so prior to, all the amendments that have been discussed and worked on for decades, Canada has addressed the discrimination in the Indian Act only after being compelled to do so through litigation. And so once again, AMC is clear that Bill S2 must be passed with the Senate amendments intact to break the longstanding pattern of reforms that have always been reactive to litigation. The harms of 6.2 are not new. They've been studied on, consulted on, clearly identified, including through Canada's own processes and the testimony that have been heard by the Senate. The Senate has heard unanimous calls to eliminate the second generation cutoff. And so now the amendment is before Canada. And so the question is no longer whether this provision is harmful, because that is something that we already know at this point with all the testimony that we've heard. The question is whether or not Canada will act. And so what is different in this moment is Canada's commitment to implement the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples through the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act and its action plan measures. That commitment was not intended to slow reform. It was intended to ensure that Canada works in partnership with First Nations to eliminate discrimination while advancing First Nations jurisdiction over their own citizens. These obligations must proceed together. Under the action plan, this includes both engagement processes and the development of pathways beyond the Indian Act, including First Nations control over their own citizenship. This reflects the consistent direction of First Nations leadership. Engagement has been confined to consultation on the Indian Act amendments under Action Plan Measure 2.8 without advancing at the same time the transition to First Nations control over citizenship under Action Plan Measure 2.9. This maintains a model where Canada determines outcomes for individuals while delaying and diminishing the collective authority of First Nations to define their own citizenship. UNDRIP does not support the use of consultation to delay change or to maintain discriminatory laws. It requires partnership, respect for First Nations authority, and meaningful progress. When consultation is used to delay necessary reform, it becomes a tool that sustains rather than dismantles colonial harm. Indian status, as determined by Canada, is not First Nation citizenship. Canada does not define First Nation citizenship. We do. Sorry, my notes here are okay. So if left unchanged, these provisions will continue to reduce the number of First Nations people recognized by Canada. Without status, First Nations citizens are no longer recognized by Canada as treaty beneficiaries and are cut off from various different services such as housing, education, and the protections that are tied to that recognition, and in some cases, even from burial in their own First Nation. Canada's second generation cutoff damages the social fabric of our nations and creates political and social tensions with families and communities. This impacts people's mental health and a sense of belonging. Looking at the impacts on Manitoba First Nations, across many of our member First Nations here in Manitoba, there's a growing imbalance between those registered under 6.1 and those registered under 6.2. We have an increasing number of children that are at risk of being excluded entirely under the second generation cutoff. This is not simply a matter of individual status. It directly affects the future composition of our nations. This creates real governance challenges. It affects who is recognized for the purposes of housing, programs, and community planning.
Thank you very much.
This law.
Thank you very much, Grand Chief. And there'll be, we're going to go to questions. There'll be an opportunity to get some more information out too as well.
Sure.
So we're going to start with
Thank you.
MP Morin for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll go to Chief Daniels first, Grand Chief Daniels. The government sometimes says we got to consult, And in this case, that's what they say. Yesterday, there was an announcement when it came to one assessment in Manitoba. Were you consulted on that?
No.
Why do you think you're being consulted on the extinction of First Nations people, but you're not being consulted on one assessment?
Because the government picks and chooses what they want to consult on. They don't have a standard on where exactly consult. I mean, consultation, when you're talking nation to nation, you should probably consult on a lot of things. Every legislation that goes through should have the approval of First Nations. I mean, if we really want to talk about nation to nation.
How does the inconsistencies in consultation applications, how does that reflect trust between First Nations and the government?
Well, it doesn't build trust, that's for sure. I think anybody who understands diplomacy and creating relationships and genuine partnerships knows that you have to have consistency to have trust.
Does it often feel fake sometimes?
I think that's where government likes to operate, in the gray area of and the vagueness of what consultation means.
And can you just reiterate one of the examples that you said, which was just because of an arbitrary date on Bill C-31, a family that had 3 children, all the same mother and father, one is a status Indian and the other 2 are not, and they're not able to access the same rights as their family within their community.
Yeah, it bureaucratizes families and the relationship dynamics of the family. So I don't think the government should have any business in the households like that with between families and between nations.
Thanks, Chief. I'm going to go to Zoe next. You mentioned, this is a bigger picture, whether you want to go farther or whether you want to go down into the weeds in terms of the details beyond just getting into some of the higher level discussions that we're having here. And one that you made that was particularly interesting to me was, you cannot pass down property to your children. Everyday Canadians outside the reserve can pass down property. There's no issue there. But for something like this, if the second generation keeps going on, you cannot pass down your property. Is that what you mentioned?
Yes, I can't. So I literally have a home right next to my grandma and my grandpa. And as it stands, I cannot pass my home on to my children. And it leaves me wondering, like, who do I leave it to? Do I leave it to, like, my sister? And then what's going to happen when she passes away? And the really crazy part to me, actually, is that my fiancé, who will be my husband, under the Real Matrimonial Property Act, he can have my house if we get a divorce. But my kids, my children, born and raised on the reserve, cannot. That doesn't make any sense to me. It's a violation of my rights. And I worked hard for my home. Should I not be able to leave that to my children?
This might refer back to maybe a previous question in the previous round of how this affects women even more than it affects men.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I also just want to elaborate on that a little bit if I can. I mean, I work for Justice for Girls. We work with teenage girls in poverty. And teenage girls, Indigenous women and girls, are already 12 times more likely to go missing or be murdered than any other person in the country. So we're talking about already vulnerable girls, teen girls who need status to have access to critical resources, supports, and services to keep them safe, who are experiencing violence, homelessness, difficulties with education, the child welfare system. It's so critical, and we know Indigenous women are more likely to be single mothers. And so, yeah, I'm faced now with, okay, so my non-Indigenous husband can take my home, but my kids can't have it, and God forbid something happens between us, he can take my home, and then I'm left with no status children, I'm with no place on the reserve, and no ability for them to access Jordan's principle, healthcare, education that was critical to my life. It's not right. It's discrimination, and it's a violation of the Equality Charter.
And as a young Musqueam person, you broke cycles. Your mother broke cycles. You mentioned even now, like you've been pretty successful, and you don't access hardly any non-insured benefits. You've gone through a lot to lift yourself up. But this won't be the same opportunity, and your children in the future, should this not change, will not have that same opportunity. And those cycles may have a higher risk of actually repeating themselves.
Of course. I mean, I truly, in reflecting for S2 through APA and Senate and here, it really did occur to me that I am the first in my family to graduate university. My grandpa couldn't go, because if he went to university, he'd be enfranchised and lose his status. So my mother was just focusing on graduating high school. I'm the first one in my family who really had a chance here to go to university, build a life for myself, break that cycle, create a career. And now my kids don't have status. That's the reward for my grandpa going to residential school at 5 years old and suffering incredible atrocities and working so hard to provide for his children, and my mom working 2 jobs to put me through school. This is the reward our family gets, is you're not First Nations anymore?
No. Thank you. I'll come back.
Thank you very much. MP Levac, 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. I don't know if you want to use the earpieces because I will be speaking in French. Thank you. I'd like to thank all the witnesses for being with us today and for sharing your points of view on this bill, which is very, very important. We appreciate having you here. I would like to start with the Michael Kaluhu Nation Society, because this bill, as two, it focuses a lot on enfranchisement. So the question is, how do the measures in Bill S2 could rectify enfranchisement-related issues, and what kinds of impacts will these have on the members of your communities?
Thank you for your question. The impacts that Bill S2 will have on the Michelle Kaluhu Nation would be profound, because we're not talking about certain sectors of a population or demograph of a community. We're talking about an entire nation. There are no other avenues other than S2 to address in basically a stroke of a pen the inequities that this nation has suffered as a result of Canada's efforts to exterminate them. Since 1985, probably 50% of Michelle descendants have perished. And so, arguably and sadly, the intentions of the extermination colonial policies are being fulfilled through attrition. And if this bill is delayed, then that perpetuates the offense, in our view. And it's a real difficult position that the Michelle Nation is in, because, of course, dealing with second-generation cutoff is important, and it would impact descendants of the Michelle. But we're talking, again, about an entire nation. And if the bill is delayed, or if enfranchisement of the Michelle Nation is not addressed, then it's status quo. And that causes profound harm to a community. And just a small anecdote about what it means to be exterminated like that. And you've heard other testimonies similar. The very first meeting that I did with them, we gathered with, they're represented by a board. I asked if they wanted to proceed with ceremony. They said, well, we don't have any. Do you have elders? We have old people. And, that just floored me, because they didn't give that up. It was taken away.
Merci beaucoup. J'aimerais maintenant procéder à une question concernant.
Thank you very much. I will now ask a question about the self-determination of First Nations and all this, because the government is often criticized for imposing rules and regulations upon First Nations, the Indian Act, for instance, among many others, of course. But to what extent is it important for First Nations to be at the center of developing and elaborating this piece of legislation, which will get rid of these restrictions and fully recognize their full value and return the dignity to these communities? Of course, that is one of the reasons why a collaboration process was initiated about 2 years ago. Of course, we don't want to keep undertaking consultation forever and ever, but what is the importance of adopting this kind of a way of doing things so that the legislation adopted by the House of Commons is legally and judicially defensible?
Am I on? Okay. You know, the problem with consultation is that even here today, if we're all being honest, you have not heard anything new. You have been hearing this since the 80s. You heard it again in 94 with the Royal Commission. You heard it again with respect to the Michelle Nation from the Specific Claims Commission. All of their recommendations were rejected. Consultation now is at best being used as a shield to prevent those difficult decisions being made. At worst, it's being weaponized to avoid those decisions altogether. And consultation is just an embracement of status quo, and it provides the illusion of reconciliation, because that's not what is required here. The issue, based on the questions that have been asked today in the earlier panel and previously, are really, you know, how does the nation feel about Canada getting involved in membership? You already are, and you have for 150 years. Nations will deal with it. Of course, nations don't want to embrace all of these new people because of the cost, but you already know that. All of you honourable members know that.
Merci.
And next, we're going to go to Deputy Gill for 6 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank all of our witnesses who are here with us and online today. Now, Mr. Chalifu's last word was quite impactful. You said that there's nothing new under the sun. In terms of what we are hearing today, we have heard it many times. I haven't always been here, but there are people who have been here longer than myself, especially Ms. McIver. So this is something I said before, but I will repeat it. It is extremely difficult for lawmakers to be in a position where we are asked to make decisions on behalf of another nation without fully understanding what their needs and requirements are. A nation cannot decide on behalf of another nation, but the system as we have today remains colonial. So Mr. Chalifu said it. We are repeating the same thing, but are we ready to pass S2 with the amendments from the Senate? And once again, do you believe that, as Mr. Chalifu was saying, is consultation just used as an excuse, as a shield, because you are saying it's since 1985, but it even goes before that. We've been waiting forever. So Chief Wilson, Daniels, I'd like to hear your points of view on this main question. Maybe start with Ms. Craig Sparrow. Thank you very much. Or maybe Chief Daniels, whoever wants to go first.
Yeah, I just want to say just one thing really quickly. The membership on First Nations is already defined and independent of Canada. It's First Nations make their own membership as it stands right now. It's the citizenship recognized by Canada, the way it was structured, that we're talking about. So the impact actually on the nation is not necessarily of their own making. You know, like if a First Nation decides at some point they want to change the structure of their membership, they can change that already. They don't need you to change that. What we need you to do is to recognize that the current members of our nation that we already recognize are going to continue to have their status. So that's the first thing. The second is when we talk about funding and the impact on funding, poverty and the challenges we face as a nation or as a First Nation are going to be improved by creating better housing, by creating better jobs, by creating, you know, advanced manufacturing. Those kinds of things need to happen anyway. And so I don't think that should be used as an excuse, or those kinds of lines of argument should be used as an excuse of delaying the justice that needs to happen here.
I'll just add that, yes, it needs to happen now. Yes, we're ready. When you think about it, I'm having kids anyways. I live on a reserve anyways. Like, these children are being born, whether we like it or not, into these communities. It's, are they going to have access to the same rights that I have? We were talking about children of current status Indians or to-be status Indians, and this is not some abstract, big millions of people. We know about 20,000 people will be entitled once the bill passes and royal assent comes into effect. And then 300,000 over 45 years. This is not millions of people. These are children who are either born today, little kids, or who are going to be born anyways. It's the reality is, are they going to have rights as a First Nations person or not?
Chef Wilson, est-ce que vous voulez...
Chief Wilson, would you like to also answer the same question?
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much. When I think about the impact to community, to First Nations right now, I always think about our children. And first and foremost, this is something that I included on my previous presentation, is how this has impacted my own family. When I think about the mental health and well-being of our families and our future generations, the current children or grandchildren within our nations, and how they're impacted, whether they're status or non-status. And right now, my own child is non-status based off of, her grandfather, who identifies as Métis. And throughout our history, we've identified that somebody within our family had signed Métis script. And this is a long history of First Nations in terms of the struggles and the barriers that we've had to face through, this legislation. And so when I think about my own daughter and the way that she speaks to me about her connection to our community, she always asks me, Mom, when are you getting my status? What is that? When is it going to happen? Like, there's a disconnect that she feels with the community, even though I always tell her, you are a part of Long Plain First Nation. You are a part of this family, but there is an impact to her, and there's an impact to all of our children that are currently non-status. And so right now we need to move forward with Bill S2, the harm that it's causing our families and our children. This is something that we can ignore, and Canada can ignore those impacts to our children. And just speaking to, Zoe's comments, we are continually having to worry about who we're dating, who we're marrying. Like, that is an unfair thing that Canada has placed on women, First Nations women. And so we need to move forward with Bill S2.
Et peut-être une dernière question rapide, le chef.
Maybe one last quick question. Great Chief Daniels spoke about bureaucratic extinction. If S2 doesn't go ahead, do you all agree? Maybe those who haven't answered the question, any of our witnesses who haven't gone yet. Thank you.
10 seconds left, so we may have to get some things in writing, if you can, for that particular question. But,
oui, c'est rapide, ou non, c'est rapide.
Yes or no, very quickly. If
oui or no. I think they're all agreeing. Okay, we got it. Thank you. Next, we go to MP Morin, please.
Thank you, Chair. I want to recognize the unique position of the Michelle Band. It's good to see the Michelle Band again. Of course, my home nation, they're the most closest First Nation, so obviously there's ties there as well. It's always great to see people from back home. I do recognize that in a previous iteration of this bill, in Nichols, and I think it was it C-38? Is that what it was? Had a different scope, and that things have evolved through prorogation and complications have been added for a bigger picture. But ultimately, what I would think is a better, bigger picture. But still, the Michelle Band it has come at some anxiety to the Michelle Band and its people. That should be recognized. One thing that's also not talked about a lot in this bill is mentally incompetent Indians. That was a racist term of the Indian Act, and it's being changed, which is a good thing. Second generation cutoff is talked about a lot, and rightfully so, but mentally incompetent Indians is something that is also being changed for the better. Ms. Asman, are you aware of this and what some historical aspects of this, and would you care to elaborate on the effects of changing those wordings within the Indian Act?
Well, that caught me off guard, but as some of you may know, as I spoke in the first in Senate, I spoke of the mentally incompetent Indian portion because that was my grandmother and my aunt. They were removed from the Michelle Band list, labeled mentally incompetent Indians, and treated very poorly for the rest of her life. My aunt is still on the murdered and missing Indigenous list to this day. Never met her. So the term itself, of course, it just tears me up, as you can tell. You know, changing the terminology, okay, I just hope that nobody ever has to feel the way I felt. My sister's here with me today. We've felt it. And I just pray that that changes, and I pray that this bill passes so that the Michelle people, we're fighting to get our band back. And this bill will really help us to generate the list we need to find our people, to bring them home. And maybe we can put some of these harms and these hurts to rest. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, and the impact of the decision to exclude her grandparents, there's 4 people that were removed from the list, which had a profound impact on the surrenders that were taken from Michelle. They didn't have any rights, and so they weren't counted. And what gets lost here is that Michelle was a band. They were a thriving band on some of the most valuable land in the country, and it was taken, like many others, including your land, Chief, at the same time. And giving back their status is not just giving them a membership card. It's the beginning of a path of reconciliation. It's not reconciliation. There's a lot to go. There's surrenders, the amalgamation, or the enfranchisement, but this bill needs to pass.
Would you agree, Mr. Shalfa, you're a lawyer, right? Would you agree that this violates the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the second generation cutoff in particular?
Well, I agree that the amendment would correct it. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. You almost got me there. You almost got me. Yeah.
I didn't even try to do that, but you spoke better than me.
Yes, it would.
Thank you for your legal opinion. I don't have one, so I'm not a lawyer. Okay. What would this? I guess the last thing to do to say is Michelle Band has been waiting for a long time, and again, their hopes were held high before prorogation last Parliament. I think, again, there's dynamics in this Parliament, too, that affect this. And you know, hopes were raised. What would this mean to pass this bill in its current form still, which includes aspects of C-38? Where would it get Michelle if this bill would pass?
Well, Michelle's not a band, as you know.
Yeah.
And the passage of this bill would help with that process. Canada has been less than expeditious on addressing the creation of bands in Canada.
Thank you very much, Troy.
Just for your information, they've been involved in consultation and self-assessment on the band creation rule since 1994. So when you talk about consulting on benefits of a bill that will help nations, and you say we want to go consult, well, that's what we think. Well, here we go.
Thank you very much,
See you
Troy.
again in 30 years.
Thank you.
So
we have to move to the next questioner, and you'll be able to
Yep.
expand on that. Jaime, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank everyone for their conversation on this. And it's deeply compelling what the witnesses are saying. I think that enfranchisement is cut and dry. The government is committed to that. That's why this legislation has moved forward twice. I think the overall crux and the challenge around this is the Senate amendments. And you know, I think it's a deeply personal thing for all of us who grow up with Section 6.1 and Section 6.2 hanging over our heads. And Grand Chief Wilson said, you know, this is something that females have to deal with. But as a young male, I remember being told by my godmother and my surrounding family in my neighborhood, they always said, don't you bring home any blonde-haired, blue-eyed white girls to my house. And I never understood that as a blonde-haired, green-eyed Mi'kmaq who is pale-skinned, why there would be the objection towards that. But, you know, what they were, I think where they were trying to get at is they wanted me to be able to pass on my status. They wanted me able to do that as a Mi'kmaq person. And as the Mi'kmaq citizenship coordinator, when we were determining who's Mi'kmaq, the conversation was not as much around parentage and lineal, but what does it mean to be a Mi'kmaq person? And so what does it mean to be, you know, a status Indian is the kind of the question that we have here. But Zoe, I know your story was very compelling, and I really appreciate you sharing that with us. Do you feel the Indian Act, as it currently is written, punishes you for falling in love with someone outside of your community or the status?
Yes, as it currently stands, it absolutely punishes me for that. And Indian status, again, is the relationship between the government and First Nations peoples. And this is about me as a First Nations woman, an Indian status, 6'2" status holder in my relationship with the government. And I am being punished because I'm not a man born before 1985. And to be clear, what we're talking about here is doing what should have been done in 85. Instead of creating this cutoff, we should have given Indian women the same rights as Indian men. So we're talking about undoing a discriminatory law here and putting things the way they should have been. So yes, as it stands, I'm being punished, as Indigenous women have been punished for time immemorial, or, you know, since colonization at this point. So yeah, unfortunately, I love my fiance, and I'm having kids with him, and that means I'm here talking to all of you. I mean, I probably would be anyways, but that's my reality. It's the reality of so many Indigenous peoples and young Indigenous peoples. Yeah. We're talking about young people here who are being forced to think about, like, do I ask someone else to sign a birth certificate?
Yeah, and we've heard testimony around that, and I think that one of the things that we've been looking at, and one of the things that is important to us, is figuring out how to solve problems, but doing it collaboratively with First Nations communities. Now, the Senate has proposed one solution on here, one parent solution, and that does a lot of taking care of some of the challenges around this. However, we have First Nations communities and First Nations people telling us, we don't like this solution, we don't want this. And so I guess, you know, we haven't heard anything new today. Troy, you're exactly right. But through the study, we're going to hear from people who aren't sure that this is the solution, and they'd rather have their First Nations communities determine status. What do we tell them if they want to be able to determine for themselves who the status members are in their communities instead of Senate, instead of the Parliament? What do I tell them?
I just profoundly disagree with you. I think that by approaching this issue with that kind of a question, you are muddying the waters between the legal distinction between membership and status. Bands know that. They know that if this bill passes tomorrow, that there could be an impact on their membership. Should they choose, they can decide to embrace this. And so gearing up for a big consultation process to figure out what nations want, you know that answer too. You know that answer too. Because they...
I don't think I said consultation, though. I said collaboration. Troy, as when we pass legislation, yeah, we usually have partners and stakeholders when we come through and go through things and say, here's what the stakeholders are asking us to do. In this case, we don't have a stakeholder. We have the Michelle Band, but that's for enfranchisement. So without that collaboration, without that ability to create legislation in collaboration with First Nations, whether it be AFN, whether it be AMC, we need a stakeholder to discuss amendments. At this point, we don't have that.
And that's the time we have right now. We go to our last questioner, and that will be Deputy Gill, s'il vous plaît.
Merci.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Chalifoux' comments. I found them very interesting in response to Mr. Baptiste's question. If you want to go ahead and complete your answer because you got interrupted, please do so.
Collaboration, consultation, engagement. A lot of us on this side don't see a distinction. We see it as a process. They all represent a process that takes away from the decision. It might give you a more informed decision, theoretically, at the end of the day when you're prepared to make it, to pass the legislation in whatever form. But ultimately, we can keep saying this and keep talking about and keep testifying. All of that information is there already. All the people before you and all the people that have submitted that aren't presenting and those who came before us. You know, I'm honored to be sitting here in a room with Sharon McIver. These pioneers and these champions have already done your job to give you the information that you seek today. And the fear isn't that you're going to come up with a different answer. The fear is that you're protracting the conversation unnecessarily. And we have a nation, and it doesn't matter if we're talking about second gen or enfranchisement. We have unresolved, unreconciled, discriminatory issues that have a serious effect on nations.
You were very generous with me, Mr. Chair, today.
Okay, thank you everyone for your testimony today on this very important subject matter, and we will adjourn, and we will be meeting again on April 28th, I believe, on S2. So thank you very much, Chi Miigwech, and adjourn.